The first time Grant Wexler appeared on my docket, I was behind the bench with one hand on a case file. I had not read the evidence, only the assignment sheet. But his name pulled me back to a kitchen where he had placed divorce papers beside my breakfast. I had been pregnant with our daughter when he said, "Sign before the baby comes. Sadie, because I will not have time for your feelings afterward." The memory lasted one breath, because the courtroom door opened and Grant walked in wearing the expression he used whenever he believed he understood the room. He looked directly at me, and for the first time in years, neither of us had somewhere to hide. Grant did not look alarmed when the clerk called the case. He leaned toward his attorney, then lifted his eyes and murmured, "Sadie," loudly enough for the front rows to hear the name he had no right to use there. I addressed the record, disclosing that Grant was my former husband, that we shared one daughter, and that I once held an ownership interest in the company preceding his business. His attorney rose too slowly, as though the delay might make the conflict look less serious. I did not give him that chance. "I am recusing myself before reviewing evidence or ruling on any disputed issue," I stated, then directed the clerk to reassign the matter randomly and preserve the transcript. Grant's expression changed for a second, but I saw it, because disappointment looks different from fear. He expected me to remain, expected every unfavorable ruling to become proof that an angry former wife had engineered his prosecution. By stepping away before the case began, I removed the story he had prepared and left him with the documents he had come to avoid. I closed the file without opening it, rose from the bench, and walked out knowing the first consequence had arrived without me deciding a single thing. Jonah Pierce received the case after I stepped away, and the first item on his docket was Elise Dutton's investigation timeline. Her inquiry had started months before Grant's name appeared in my courtroom, after a hotel requested warranty service on equipment billed as new. The serial number belonged to a machine previously registered at another property, and Elise followed that mismatch into invoices describing units that did not exist, where the paperwork claimed. Nothing in the record depended on my history with Grant, so his accusation had already lost its foundation. As Elise worked through the company's records, my name appeared beside Grant's on the first service agreements. Old emails showed me drafting warranty language, negotiating payment schedules, and introducing the client that gave us credibility when the business had little more than rented tools. Then came the transfer agreement, signed while I was pregnant, removing me from ownership through a valuation that treated the company as though its largest opportunity did not exist. The document looked ordinary until the dates around it were placed in order. Grant had received confirmation that a hotel contract was approved in principle before I signed away my interest. He never showed me that letter, and the attorney he selected described the transfer as a practical adjustment before the baby arrived. Weeks later, Grant handed me divorce papers and moved into an apartment already leased near Corinne's office. The sequence needed no interpretation because the approval, signature, and lease dates were sitting together in the same record. Elise notified me that I could be called as a witness concerning the original agreements and what Grant disclosed before I signed. I removed myself from every internal conversation connected to the case and required any contact to come through a subpoena. "I will answer what the documents require," I told the court administrator, "and nothing beyond that." The most private season of my life could now become public evidence. But the paper trail had made one fact clear. Grant had changed our future before he left. Elise questioned Corinne Vale about supplier certifications carrying her electronic signature, and Corinne defended Grant before understanding what she had been shown. She insisted the team had provided information. Until Elise placed one approval before her from a week, Corinne was attending a conference in another state. The access record showed the document had been opened, signed, and sent from the computer inside Grant's office. Corinne took a copy home because she believed there might be an explanation that did not end her marriage. She placed the approval between them and asked, "How many times have you used my signature without telling me?" Grant did not deny it, answering, "We run a family and a company together." Corinne, I saved time. And you benefited from every contract those papers protected. When she demanded a number, he lowered his voice and added, if we keep the same story, they cannot separate who decided what. That sentence exposed the purpose of the signatures because Grant was not protecting his wife from the investigation. He was preparing to divide responsibility with her. Corinne remembered how Grant had always described me as a woman demanding money from a company I never helped build. The archived agreements now showed my warranty language, my client introductions, and my name beside his before I signed anything away. She had accepted his version because it made their relationship easier to defend, and the evidence removed that excuse without making her innocent. Corinne hired an attorney, complied with the subpoena, and surrendered her work computer. She admitted giving Grant information about hotel approval standards and overlooking reports that should have raised questions. What she provided was a message Grant sent before our divorce, instructing someone to withhold the contract announcement until my transfer was complete. The message did not prove every later invoice, but it established that hiding important information had been part of his method from the beginning. By the time Elise documented Corinne's account, Grant had lost the second wife he expected beside him and gained a witness who understood how he built his traps. Grant answered the investigation with a sworn statement blaming Caleb Monroe, the technician who had supervised his crews. According to Grant, Caleb had chosen refurbished parts, altered reports, and hidden those decisions from management. The statement described Grant as a client-facing owner who could not know what happened inside every machine his company serviced. When Caleb read it, he understood that his silence had never protected his job, because Grant had written the version in which one employee carried everything. Caleb met Elise Dutton with his attorney and admitted what he had avoided saying for months. I followed instructions I knew were wrong because I was afraid of losing my paycheck and my insurance, he told her, keeping both hands flat on the table. He did not claim he had objected every time, and he did not ask to be treated like a hero after his name appeared in Grant's statement. Elise agreed to consider his cooperation only after he surrendered his phone, the maintenance application, and records from each hotel visit. His confession mattered because it matched evidence he could not edit afterward. The application logs showed the same pattern across service calls. Whenever Caleb's team recommended replacing a machine under the contract, Grant directed them to repair it temporarily or install a refurbished component instead. The system recorded who opened each report, when it was viewed, and which serial number photographs were attached before the invoice went out. Grant's account had opened the disputed reports shortly before customers were billed for new equipment, destroying his claim that technicians acted without his knowledge. The consequences reached the business before any trial began. One hotel suspended its contract after discovering that a serial number on its invoice belonged to equipment billed at another property. 2 more clients ordered independent inspections, and the insurer opened a review because several claims relied on descriptions that no longer matched the machines on site. Caleb still faced professional discipline for following improper instructions, but Grant could no longer place the entire operation on him. The records showed exactly where the reports traveled before customers paid. I entered Jonah Pierce's courtroom without my robe, carrying the subpoena and documents I had signed. For the first time since Grant's case began, I sat below the bench instead of behind it, with no authority over what happened next. Jonah limited the testimony to my role, the transfer agreement, and what Grant disclosed before I signed. Grant watched from the defense table while his attorney began with my anger instead of the records. You were furious when your marriage ended, weren't you? He pressed, as if emotion could erase dates and evidence. Yes, I answered, but the approval letter arrived before I signed, and Grant still told me the contract was uncertain. He moved to the valuation, asking whether I understood every provision, and I answered. I understood what I was shown. I was not shown the letter confirming the hotel's approval. His questions kept reaching for resentment, while my answers kept returning to paper. He asked about Corinne, and I confirmed Grant had leased an apartment near her office before placing divorce papers in front of me. He asked whether I wanted Grant to lose his business, and I held his gaze until the room settled. I gave up every chance to decide his future when I recused myself. I said, "What happens now belongs to the evidence, not to me." Jonah asked Grant's attorney to identify one email, call, or instruction showing I directed Elise Dutton's investigation. The attorney shuffled notes, requested a moment, and finally admitted he had no such record. Elise's timeline showed the serial number inquiry began months before the case reached my docket. Grant's defense depended on making me the source of his trouble, and the dates removed me from that story. When I stepped down from the witness chair, Grant did not look angry. He looked exposed because the accusation he prepared could no longer carry him past the documents. I had not ruled against him, touched his company, or asked the court for anything. I had answered under oath, and that was enough to leave him facing the evidence alone. Corinne entered Jonah Pierce's courtroom under an agreement requiring her to tell the truth without erasing her part. She admitted she knew Grant was married when their relationship began and knew I was pregnant, but he claimed our marriage existed only on paper. She also admitted she wanted to believe him because that version made her choices easier to live with. Nothing in her testimony asked the court to mistake regret for innocence. The prosecutor walked her through supplier records she had approved without demanding enough technical support. Corinne acknowledged passing Grant information about hotel standards and signing documents she should have reviewed more carefully. Then the access logs appeared, showing the serious certifications were created from Grant's office while she was elsewhere. "I was careless," she answered, "but I did not authorize him to put my name on work I never inspected." Grant's attorney suggested Corinne was changing her story to save herself, and she did not deny cooperation could reduce her exposure. She described confronting Grant when he told her they had both benefited and therefore had to carry the consequences together. "Sharing a life is not permission to borrow my signature," she replied, keeping her eyes on the attorney. "He wanted me close enough to use and far enough away to blame." Caleb's maintenance records supported her account, and the application data showed Grant opening disputed reports before invoices were issued. One hotel ended its contract under a false disclosure clause. 2 others suspended new work, and the bank reduced the company's credit line during review. Technicians began leaving because Grant could no longer promise their names would remain outside the investigation. Each consequence followed a document the business itself had created. From my seat behind the gallery rail, I watched Corinne finish without asking me to forgive her. She had helped Grant enter my worst season, and telling the truth years later did not erase that choice. What it removed was his ability to make another woman carry decisions he controlled. When Corinne stepped down, Grant was left with 2 wives, one former employee, and a record connecting his private methods to his public ones. By the time prosecutors prepared for trial, Grant's lawyers asked for a plea conference. Their first proposal placed the technical decisions on Caleb and the supplier approvals on Corinne, while Grant accepted only limited responsibility as owner. The prosecutor rejected it because the access logs showed Grant opening disputed reports before invoices were released to customers. The agreement moved forward only after he admitted that the approvals, billing choices, and efforts to divide responsibility had all passed through him personally. Corinne accepted probation, professional penalties, and continued cooperation for the certifications she signed without proper review. Caleb faced licensing supervision and mandatory compliance training because following improper instructions did not erase his own duty to report them. Elise removed allegations the evidence could not support, instead of stretching the case to make every person look equally guilty. Grant remained the central actor, but no one left the courtroom carrying a cleaner history than the documents allowed them to claim. At the plea hearing, Jonah read every charge, every waived right, and every possible consequence before Grant was permitted to sign. Grant once secured my signature by withholding the contract approval that changed the value of what I owned. Now Jonah asked. Has anyone promised you anything outside this agreement? And do you understand exactly what you are giving up? Grant answered. Yes, Your Honor, with the document still unsigned before him. Nothing could be called a routine adjustment this time, because the full meaning of his signature had been spoken clearly into the public record. Jonah imposed a prison term within the sentencing guidelines, restitution to affected clients, and a lengthy ban from public contracting. An independent monitor received authority over the remaining business assets and verified claims, leaving me with no company, payment, or influence over the distribution. Grant asked his attorney to arrange a private apology, but I required every communication to remain through counsel and become part of the record. I had waited years for truth to be stated plainly, and when it finally was, I did not need him alone in a room to repeat it, where no private version could later replace what he admitted. The Judicial Ethics Commission cleared my handling of Grant's case after reviewing the assignment record, my disclosure, and the moment I stepped away, I returned to my docket without a promotion, a ceremony, or anyone pretending the past had become harmless. The finding mattered because it confirmed I had protected my work by limiting my own power. Grant had always believed authority meant controlling the story, but the record showed restraint could carry more weight. Corinne divorced him, lost her position in hotel procurement, and started again in a role without supplier approval authority. We crossed paths once in the courthouse hallway, where she stopped and said, "I knew you were pregnant, and I chose the version of him that made my choices easier." I answered, "Telling the truth kept him from placing his decisions on someone else, but it does not erase what you chose." We left in opposite directions, without forgiveness being forced into something it was not. Caleb completed professional supervision and joined a smaller company that required 2 people to approve every service report. Elise returned to cases that never reached the news, while Jonah published his sentencing explanation so the affected clients could understand each ruling. Grant began serving his sentence and lost any authority to direct the company through another person. Every consequence matched a document, a signature, or a decision already proven in court. My daughter was old enough to read the public record and ask why I had never told her everything. I admitted I believed softening the truth would protect her, but silence had also left her building a father from missing information. "You decide what relationship you want with him," I told her, "but I will never hide what happened again." That evening, when she laughed from the next room, the house felt like ours without anyone else explaining why. For years, I thought peace would begin when he admitted what he had done. It began when I stopped waiting for him to explain my life. Then I came home and heard my daughter laughing in the next room. Our future had moved beyond his reach, without needing his permission.